Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Live with the League. I'm your host, Emily Kalashevsky, Assistant Director of Member Experience and Learning here at the League. We've got a great lineup for today's episode, from an inside look at our brand new online learning platform to important updates on federal and state policy that could have real implications for your community. A couple of reminders: if you've got questions for either of our guests, you can place those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll get to those as best we can throughout the show. With that, we are going to go ahead and start things off with our special guest, our Executive Director and CEO, Dan Gilmartin, who is here to talk to us about our new online learning platform. Dan, thanks for being here. Let's dive right in. What exactly is this new learning platform, and how is it different from what the League has offered in the past?
Thanks, Emily. We're really excited about it. It's our new online learning platform, and it's going to allow us to basically bring all of our traditional work that we do from an educational standpoint for local elected and appointed officials, and it's going to allow us to bring that to them in digital format. And we're excited about that. We're going to be able to do pretty much all the things that we've always done in terms of educating people, and we're actually going to be able to go out and add a whole bunch of new things, and it'll all be available to everybody to utilize at their discretion in their own homes, at City Hall, at Village Hall, whatever makes the most sense to you. So we're really excited about the fact that we can get to so many more people who don't always have the capacity to travel and attend different events.
Yeah. From your perspective, though, what's the coolest feature or most exciting aspect of the launch and of this new platform?
Yeah, it brings us into the age that we're in, and it allows us to be so dynamic in terms of how we present things. In the past, if you've gone to webinars, seminars, or things that maybe universities or community colleges offer, they have a tendency to be somewhat static, and you've got sort of one way of looking at things. When we have the capacity to not just create information for people and to create programs for people up front, we have the capacity to go in and change those as things change. Maybe a new law gets passed. Maybe there's a new best practice from a community throughout Michigan. We can get there beyond the ground and be able to share that data, that information in a very updated way with people that allows them to become better stewards of providing public services and communities. I mean, that's what we're here for, and it's really exciting. It'll work. It'll completely phase in with our elected officials academy. So it'll be available through the League site and through people's League ID. They'll be able to basically access things in a way they haven't been before. So I think the whole program is a way in which it allows us to get to more people more often and on subjects that really matter to them.
Yeah, I think my favorite part, aside from it just being accessible, right, is that the courses themselves are broken down into bite-sized segments. They're like 15-minute
Yeah,
videos. So if you only have a few minutes, or you want to go back and review something about, OMA closed sessions, for example, because that's something that's coming up, you can do that in a quick 10 minutes that you've got, whether that's at 3 p.m. or 3 a.m., depending on what's going on in your life. So I think that
absolutely.
might be one of my favorite parts, although I kind of like it all. Um,
Yeah, it's all worth liking. And again, it allows people to sort of go in and get what they need, because we've got, a lot of times local or newly elected officials particularly feel like, oh, I can't go to a workshop. I've only been on council for 3 months or whatever, and people know more than I do. Well, there are over 3,000 local elected officials in Michigan, and there's several hundred in that category of people who were just elected for the first time at the last election. So you can go in and get 101 basics about what it means to be a member of a city council or of a village board. And you can go all the way up through getting information on, as you said, the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act, some of the real nuts and bolts in terms of what you need to do not to get in trouble in your position, all the way through looking at ethics and civility and public leadership, and then getting involved with all of our thriving communities work and see great things happening across the state, not just in a voyeuristic way, but in a way in which we break it down for you and say, here's what you can do in your community. Here's the lessons we've learned that we want to share with you. So it's all over the map of sort of strategic innovation for local officials, as well as some of the core nuts and bolts of wherever you're at in your municipal journey. We're going to have a program for you.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, I'm curious, can you just share what courses are being offered in the system right now and how we landed on those?
Sure. We're going to start off with a group that will include lobbying for local leaders. So important for everybody in terms of how they, not just how you work within your community, but how you work with your county, how you work with state government, how you work with the federal government. So much of what's happening at those layers and levels of government is impacting us. So some basics there in terms of how you can be effective in those areas. Our thriving communities work that we've been doing at the League for years of looking at really great places, not just in our state, but elsewhere, and what are the lessons learned that locals can take back to their own communities. We've got a 101 course there. We've got local government 101 again for really for anybody. I
Mhm.
go and I attend those from time to time, and I learn something. I've been doing this a long time. So local government 101s for everybody, but it's particularly geared at people that are just maybe new to this whole process. So you can learn the best nuts and bolts, updates on FOIA and OMA, the Freedom of Information Act, and the Open Meetings Act that are always sort of prickly, I don't know,
Stickler.
stickler
Yeah.
issues that a lot of our local officials deal with from time to time. That's all there. Working with our general counsel and others. We've got programs on ethics and civility and public leadership. It's really difficult nowadays to be a local
Mhm.
official, and we're dealing with an angry sort of contingency of people out there, and we've got people that are sort of professionalizing a lot of campaigns and communities, and how best to deal with those, and how best to deal with the membership or in a group of citizens within your community is great. We've got strategic insights for local government finance, because no matter who you are and what community you're dealing with financial issues, whether that be in your general fund or in one of your off funds. So having more acumen there in terms of what's happening from a financial perspective is important. And then lastly, of the initial crew, we've got Unlocking Michigan's Housing Potential, where we look at adaptive reuse and what we call house hacking strategies. And we've got
Mhm.
some communities that have done some unbelievable work to improve the stock houses, to the housing stock within their community, as well as to add to that. And so we're sharing those best practices all the time. And again, as we talked about earlier, we'll be able to update that as new programs and projects come on board, maybe changes in laws, and we're really excited about being able to do those things. So that's sort of our initial contingent of offerings we're going to have for people, and obviously that's going to build over the years.
Yeah. All right. Well, now that we've talked about it a little bit, let's take a sneak peek, or get an inside look. So we'll be fairly brief here, but um, let's take a peek here at our course catalog. So a lot offered here. In addition to those individual courses that Dan talks about, we also have a bundle of courses at a special price point. But to take a second to look at what an actual course looks like, I'm going to go into our FOIA and Alma Essentials course. And you can see that it's broken down into what I like to call bite-sized segments. So this first one, Open Meetings Act intro and overview, you can see that video duration is 5 minutes. So if you've only got 5 minutes, you know that you can get through that section. You'll click right into the video here where you can watch the lovely Chris Johnston, of course, deliver the information on the Open Meetings Act. But going back to the course home, in addition to those videos, we do have these built-in knowledge checks. Not there to be a gotcha moment, just to make sure that the knowledge that you're supposed to be getting is what we're hitting on. And another feature that is one of my favorites, personally, Dan, is that we have linked all of the resources that our speakers reference right here in the course itself. So as we talk about our fact sheets on the Open Meetings Act, we've got those fact sheets posted here. In some of our other courses, you'll see our handbooks linked to, and a lot of resources all housed in one place in particular. Before this course is long, we've got 8 segments, of course, but our feedback survey and certificate of completion. So a really interesting, um, innovative platform to get through some of our core topics, at least for right now, because that's what we're offering sort of here in the course catalog. Anything to add on that, Dan?
Yeah.
Anything to close on?
Yeah, I think it's great. That's the dynamic portion of what we're doing here, because I think sometimes we look at online learning is really a one-way learning tool. And we have always talked about as staff that sometimes the best thing you can do when a local official has a question is get them the right referral. Chances are it happened, whatever they're dealing with happened 5 years ago, 20 miles north or 100 miles south or wherever it might be. So we've got those tentacles all over the state and even around the country. And so the information you talked about there, it's not just, hey, here's some housing issues. We're going to give you the contact information of some firms that have done some really cool work, some other local officials have done some great work, and try to basically make it not just a learning platform, but a platform to share ideas and share innovative concepts and continue with that sort of one-on-one people might have outside of just listening to a 5, a 10, or a 15-minute segment. That's really important to us because so much of what we talk about at the league, it being important. And by the way, this does not stand in the way or not replace our typical offerings that we have in person. We're going to continue with our convention, and we're going to continue with all the different programs and classes we do through the academy and elsewhere. But basically, the best thing we do there is allow people to interact together. We hear that all the time. We see that when we're there. And we're trying to cover as much of that as we can doing this new online offerings as well. So you don't just get 5-minute lecture on a point. You're going to get a whole bunch of information that you can follow up on and continue to build your own acumen in your own community. And that's the exciting part of this.
Yeah, yeah, right. What you need right when you need it, right? Our convention, CapCon, our NEOs happen at specific times, but we recognize the need is usually all the time, depending on
Yeah.
what community you're in and what you're facing. So having something for our members to access at the moment that they need it and need us is really only going to make us all stronger here in the state. So Dan, thanks for joining us and giving us that overview. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
And I know Betsy's posted in the chat a link to learn more about our online learning. And if you want to browse what courses are available or take a further peek for you personally, you can log in at my.mml.org right into your portal. There is an online learning tab, so you will be able to peek at our course offerings, get enrolled, and of course, let us know if you have any questions on that. Now, let's pivot to what's happening on the policy front. Don is here from the State and Federal Affairs team, and we are going to start right at the federal level with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There's been a lot of buzz around this, Don, so I want to walk us through some of the buzz, especially related to Medicaid and how those changes could impact Michigan's budget.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, one, we're still figuring a lot out. And even if you listen to some of the members of Congress who have voted on it, didn't realize there were some things in this that may have otherwise changed their opinion. And for all the flack that goes back to, the Obamacare era, we tend to see those things happen often in Washington. That's not a criticism or a complaint. It's when you get into these scenarios and they're trying to create something that is complex, which this is, that requires, in this case, a very partisan vote, as one party carried it, as we've seen in other situations, as we see here in this state. There's a lot of things that take place to try to line those votes up. And so those little things within the bill, we're still learning a lot about. But the big things in the bill were very public and transparent right away. Now, the question becomes, as you ask about things like Medicaid, Emily, while we don't necessarily deal with that very directly, we do have these secondary impacts that we'll face. One, there's a clear impact that it's going to have on the state budget. And so how is Michigan and their legislative process going to handle that? And then based on how they handle that, what are those trickle down components that may impact our communities? So what types of services could be impacted? Who has to step up and fill those voids? Are there things that we're going to have to do as municipalities to help with that? Will foundations have to step in? Will philanthropic groups have to step in? What are we going to do as a way in which to continue to provide these services in a way that keeps our communities, as we like to talk about, as thriving, vibrant places that our residents and constituents rely on? And so a lot of that, while the bill has passed, the impact and how that will eventually make its way down into impacting our communities in a very direct sense is going to be very, very dependent on how the state handles some of their decisions based on the loss of revenue that they will face.
So let's get into some of those. I know you talked about some of those trickle down effects, the secondary impacts. Do you have more on how this might put pressure on our communities?
It depends on who you listen to, right? So if I'm listening to appropriators at the state right now, and you got to remember we have shared power, and so
Right.
if we listen to the House, which is Republican controlled, they're going to say that the impacts are going to be less than anticipated. And if we're listening to the Democrats right now, they're going to say it's more than what's anticipated. And chances are it's probably somewhere in between, as it always is. Early indication is we're probably looking at a couple of $1 billion worth of impact.
Hmm.
And it depends on how you look at a couple of billion. One, we got to recognize it's a lot of money, right?
Right.
Even if you talk about the context of what the state of Michigan has as an $84 billion budget, well, a good portion of that budget is actually federal funds. And those
Hmm.
federal funds allow us to draw on different things, allow us to match different resources that are out there and complement other programs that exist. But the two biggest things that we're probably watching right now, or maybe the biggest thing that we're watching in terms of where I think and where we think the legislature may put the majority of their focus, is really on funding for food and meals. So the SNAP
Hmm.
program, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about the rural hospital space and how that may be impacted. But when you really think about the benefits that are impacting people very directly, and you think about the SNAP benefits that are pretty prevalent in the state of Michigan and the amount of resources that we could be losing out of that, how do you deal with it?
Mhm.
And so not only will we see some of that, but you get into the education space now, which the state is debating heavily, right? And it is the number one priority in the budget. One of the staples of the governor's proposal and previous budget has been providing free meals to students. All right, so you're going to look at some of the federal funds that have been used for that in the past may not be there in the same form. The ability for the state, as those funds go away, to cover that is going to be reduced because they may have to prioritize other areas. And so this
Mhm.
is going to be a very complicated budget to put together. And it was already complicated based on the
Right.
new scenario that we have in Lansing right now with shared power.
Exactly. Well, I know, we've been talking about some of the constraints that this budget or this bill how that could impact us here in Michigan. I want to talk a little bit about some of the potential positives that we're hearing as well. So, good news around the reauthorization of opportunity zones and some information on LIHTC. Can you walk us through what those are?
Yeah, I'll sort of start in reverse,
Yeah.
mainly because I think opportunity zones is where we're going to have the ability to make the most impact. But LIHTC, as we think
Yeah.
about low income housing tax credits, is going to be at its
Hmm.
highest level ever from the federal
Right.
government. So that's going to give MISTA a lot more resources to deal with. And sort of quietly behind the scenes, they reduce the amount that MISTA has to pay on their bonding. And so that's actually going to
Mhm.
free up more capital for that state department as a way in which to help with the current crisis and emergency that we have around housing. Opportunity zones is really interesting. Some of you may
Yeah.
remember we've played in this space very heavily when it was initially introduced several years ago. We hosted forums on it. We actually brought
Mhm.
investors to the state of Michigan to try to get them invest here. But I think maybe the most important thing right now is they need to redraw, or the governor will have the ability to redraw some of those boundaries. I think there's a great opportunity to learn from what we did the first time to make sure as
Sure.
we get into these census tracts, as we think about different locations across the state, how do we better match the need with the program? And
Mhm.
because of the experience that we have, I think we're going to be able, one, not only to offer some thoughts as an organization on that, but that learned experience by those that have been through this in the past is going to give us an opportunity to really take great advantage of the opportunity zones and their reauthorization, which now is not a termed program. It will be there
Mhm.
in perpetuity.
All right, so some opportunities with opportunity zones. Let's just shift gears slightly, although we're sort of talking about all of it together when we talk about the federal budget, the state budget. But back here in Michigan, can you explain what happened at the end of July? We know the statutory deadline was missed. Can you talk a little bit about what fell apart and what we can expect? I feel like we're always here every couple of weeks trying to figure it out with our crystal ball. But what can you tell us?
Yeah, and I know, Emily, when we talked about putting, this show together, it's like, how do we talk about this but not be repetitive? And
Sure.
sometimes that's a little challenging,
Yeah.
particularly when not much changes. Now again, I think the bottom line is not much has changed, right? We sit about the same place we did 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago,
Yeah.
but we thought it was important to sort of address this fact that the legislature has blown by the July
Hmm.
1 statutory deadline for passing a state budget. And when you think about that, there's no real teeth in it. The teeth really exist when you come up against the constitutional deadline. There have been some comments made out there by some talking about withholding funding from legislators or salaries from legislators if they don't meet this as a kind of stick to go along with that carrot of passage. But there are
Right.
real risks to it, right? Again, this is why education leading up to that July 1st deadline was the single biggest conversation out there. And I will say, right, it's not as if the legislature has been sitting on their hands. They worked very hard to try to find a deal before that. And there were different viewpoints on how to get to it, right? The governor clearly prioritized trying to get education done, along with also building roads into that. And that really matched with what Speaker Matt Hall wanted to do. The Senate
Hmm.
had a little bit different tactic, not that they didn't want to deal with education and roads, but they wanted to deal with the budget in its entirety, right? So where the governor and the speaker said, hey, let's take care of these two top priorities and then build the rest of the budget around that. The Senate really wanted to build the whole budget, collectively at that time. And unfortunately, they weren't able to get to an agreement. The biggest impact, quite frankly, is on K-12 education right now and the unpredictability
Right.
of that. We know from a municipal standpoint, right, when we think about statutory revenue sharing, there's clearly a component there that is challenging as well, but our dollars don't
Mhm.
necessarily fluctuate as much. And because of the constitutional piece, we're relatively, obviously those dollars are secure, but we're relatively certain of the general area we're going to be in based on where some of those projections are. We don't anticipate a cut in revenue sharing at all. The Senate's
Right.
proposed a 10% increase, the governor's proposed a 4% increase, and the House has not put out a revenue sharing budget yet. Our focus, as we've always talked about, continues to be on the revenue sharing trust fund, how we build that in and what that looks like. But these next 2.5 months are going to be critical.
Mhm.
And the biggest thing that we will watch, the biggest things we will watch for is one, can they find an agreement on education? Two, will roads be built into that overall agreement? And then three, what does the House do on a couple of these larger budget items that we care about? Primarily, what do they do both around revenue sharing and the inclusion of the public safety trust fund?
So as we talk about all of this in the context of our membership and what folks need to know, but also what they can do, if anything, what advice do you have?
Well, I think actually the advice right now is maybe even a little more on the federal side. I mean,
Mm.
obviously we need to recognize what's happening at the state level, and try to encourage our legislators and remind them of the importance of investing in communities. And then when you think about the roads piece, how important that neighborhood aspect to that and investing in neighborhood roads. But I think one of the more immediate things that we don't talk a ton about all the time is actually the federal budget. So we shouldn't confuse the fact that what they just went through is the reconciliation process. That's different than putting together the full federal budget. And while in the reconciliation process, we were very successful in protecting things like the tax exempt status on municipal bonds, on the budget side, one of the big issues we're watching is community development block grant funding or CDBG funding.
Right.
In the president's proposal, he has proposed zeroing that out. Now, this week, the subcommittee is taking that up. Unfortunately, the state of Michigan doesn't have anybody on the subcommittee that's beginning to mark up that bill. But if you want to find one thing right now to talk to your congressperson about, it would be protecting CDBG dollars. One, if you're an entitlement community, that money comes directly to you. If you're a non-entitlement community, which is the majority of our members at the league, that's a pass-through from the state ultimately onto you. And that can help invest in parks and rec, housing, and a variety of different things. That is clearly important funding at the local level and something we need to weigh in on very directly.
All right. And that was going to be my next question is CDBG, important advocacy moment related to that right now. So how can local officials engage? What recommendations do you have for that?
Yeah, I don't want to make this more complicated than what it is, right?
Yeah.
And for you that have relationships with your member of Congress, their staff tends to be
Mhm.
just like it does in Lansing, very, very important. You need to pick up the phone, write the email, do those types of things. And as we track this, we're going to provide opportunities along the way in which to weigh in that may be a little bit more direct. We'll work with our partners
Yeah.
at the National League of Cities and other local groups at the federal level. But I think the early on process right now, because of that lack of direct representation on the committee that's marking that up, is you just need to take advantage to make them aware. Because the
Mhm.
last thing that we want to have happen, and we hear this with legislators in Lansing, is, oh, I didn't hear from you. I didn't know about that.
Yep.
Just starting to get that on their radar right now. And then as things ramp up and we know where this may land, then we can build that pressure in a vote scenario. We don't anticipate ultimately at the end of the day that the dollars will be zeroed out, but that's not a reason not to engage, right? I mean, we have to remind them on a consistent basis that this is critical federal funding for communities across Michigan.
Absolutely. And can members expect a blog post or action alert from us as we get some of those updates in?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Similar to what we do with state issues. And again, what we will try to do is track that with some of the National League of Cities work. And part of
Mhm.
that is because not only then is the state of Michigan weighing in, we're going to get, almost 40, 50 other states weighing in at the same time. And so we'll utilize that coordinated effort as a way in which to put pressure on Congress. So that's one of the most effective tools that we have when we work collectively together with all of our other league partners and national partners on these issues.
Absolutely. Now, John, before we sort of wrap up for the day, is there anything else that has come up in the last couple of weeks? Any movement around other key policy items that we want to make sure our members know about?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about a few things here and there.
Yeah.
One, we've talked about tipping fees. While we thought
Yep.
maybe that would move before July 1, it has not, but we're going to continue to track that. That actually had
Yeah.
more to do probably with the budget than it did the actual issue of
Right.
tipping fees. Housing continues to be something that we have and will continue to watch very closely to see if any of the efforts around preemption reappear, which unfortunately, we are anticipating they will, but we have talked significantly on an internal basis and with our legislative friends on that issue and how we find other solutions rather than preempting. And I would just go back to really where we started this conversation, Emily, around LMS. And, one of the things that I think about that from an advocacy standpoint, it's almost like a loss prevention tool because many times things that happen in our communities, when legislators see them, they react by instituting legislation, particularly if it's something that they don't like. And so,
Right.
as our members become more educated and understand these things and work within those processes, it actually really helps us here on the back end. So, it's not just the advocacy 101 piece that you have, it's all of those other pieces collectively together that actually tremendously help our efforts in Lansing, and in some cases can prevent things from coming up that we otherwise wouldn't want to see. So I would encourage everybody to take advantage of that because that is a collective way in which to protect local rights across the state.
Absolutely. And a quick question coming in through the chat about Senate Bill 319 that's related to labor. How soon might we see action on that bill by the committee it's been assigned to? And what's the likelihood of it moving through the House?
You're testing me here for a second, so I'm gonna look it up. Dave, our labor guy, is
I
I
just pulled it up
yeah,
myself too.
I got it.
Minimum
Okay.
staffing,
Minimum
collective
staffing.
bargaining, all that.
I got it. He would have known that one right off the top. I know the
Yep.
topic, but I didn't remember the bill number. Um, So obviously that passed the Senate, which we fully anticipated. It passed the Senate in the same exact form as it did in lame duck last year. We anticipate that it has a significant uphill battle in the House. Right now, we are not anticipating a committee hearing on that anytime soon. We are never in the business of saying things won't happen. We know that that is a huge issue for our members. We're going to keep a close eye on it. We're going to talk with House members on that topic so they know exactly where our position is. We voiced that position, in the Senate as we did, and that passed on party lines. And I think right now we're anticipating that's essentially where the vote is. But that doesn't mean it will stay that way. It doesn't mean people might not utilize it as a negotiating tool. And because it is such a huge issue to our members, that is one thing we will keep a very, very close eye on between now and really December 30th of next year when
Right.
lame.
Absolutely. Okay, a couple of key things we want to make sure that you know about before we close out today. First, convention registration. It's now open. We will be in Grand Rapids in September, and we would love to see you there. So we are going to post a link to registration in the chat. In addition to that, we have our Women's Elected Leadership Intensive. The applications are open through this Wednesday, July 16th. This is a 6-week virtual program designed specifically for women serving in local elected office, focused on leadership development, strategic decision-making, and building a strong network across the state. A ton of great speakers and topics will be discussed, so make sure you apply for that by Wednesday. If you or someone you know would be a great fit, now's the time. And I want to say a big thanks to Dan for joining us today to talk about the online learning platform, and John and all of our state and federal affairs team for the work that they do. Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Live with the League. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.